providing innovation in order to support and drive that change. We focus at SETO on helping solar to be affordable and accessible for all Americans. Having solar energy support the reliability, the resilience, and the security of our grid. And as solar deployment grows from providing 5% of our electricity today to as much as 40% over the next decade, we want to maximize the benefits that flow to Americans with a special focus on underserved communities. So we're focusing on ensuring that the growth of the solar industry and the jobs that are hundreds of thousands of jobs that are created throughout the clean energy transition are equitably distributed and have good career pathways. We're supporting growth of manufacturing across the solar supply chain, and also focusing on the life cycle impacts of solar deployment and how we can support progress toward a circular economy. I just want to highlight a few of our recent announcements, or many recent announcements, and we'll end today by talking about what funding opportunities we have that are currently open. But recently, we awarded 6 small businesses, just over $1 million each, through our SBIR and SETR program. These projects will support these companies in advancing solar manufacturing technologies, concentrating solar thermal power and power electronics. We also recently announced 12 selections for our Advancing Equity Through Workforce Partnerships funding program that is working to expand the solar energy workforce in underserved communities, as well as creating career pathways for thousands of good-paying jobs. We also issued a notice of intent for up to $36 million in funding for advancing thin film photovoltaics, primarily perovskites and cadmium telluride technologies. We expect this funding opportunity to go out later this month. And with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Krista to tell us more about IRA.
Great, thanks, Becca. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. As Becca said, my name is Krista Dummett, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what was in the Inflation Reduction Act, or as I like to affectionately refer to it, IRA, if for no other reason than I like imagining Uncle Sam excitedly telling us all about his friends Uncle Bill and Uncle Ira, and that's the type of energy I'm going to try and bring to this presentation. But as I'm sure you're all aware, last August, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, marking the most significant action Congress has taken on clean energy and climate change in the nation's history. The bill contained an estimated $370 billion in clean energy investments, and the law also advanced the President's Justice 40 initiative, which committed to delivering 40% of the overall benefits of climate, clean energy, and related federal investments to communities that have been marginalized, overburdened by pollution, and underserved by infrastructure and other basic services. The majority of the funding for clean energy in IRA comes in the form of tax credits. I'm going to discuss them at a pretty high level here. There's a slide at the end that contains a number of useful links if you'd like more details, but generally there are 5 tax credits. The first, and these are listed in no particular order, is the Advanced Manufacturing Production Credit, otherwise known as the MPTC or 45X. Can we go back one? This incentivizes the production of various different components along the solar supply chain that you can see in the images on the right. The next tax credit is the Advanced Energy Project Credit, 48C. This covers a variety of different technologies and provides a tax credit for the construction of the facilities to produce various clean energy technologies. For the solar supply chain specifically, recent IRS guidance has highlighted 4 priority areas within the solar supply chain, namely the production of solar glass, polysilicon, wafers, and also the production of ingot and wafer production tools. But of course, many other steps within the supply chain are included in this incentive, from critical materials all the way through to recycling and various different technologies. Switching gears a little bit to discuss the last three tax credits. I'll take the first two together because they cover utility scale and commercial scale solar facilities together. There's the production tax credit, otherwise known as the PTC or 45, which provides a tax credit for the production of clean electricity per kilowatt hour. And then there's the investment tax credit, or the ITC, or 48, which provides a tax credit for the costs of constructing a solar facility. And thanks to IRA, these tax credits were expanded. I think there's one more transition here, Mianka, to include a variety of different bonuses for different project components, namely the inclusion of domestic content or the location in an energy community or a low-income community. And these tax credits have also been made eligible for direct pay, as well as transfer by certain entities. And again, if you want more details on this, I highly recommend you see the resources slide at the end, and we will be posting these slides, as Patrice said. But last but certainly not least, the final tax credit is the Residential Clean Energy Credit, or 25D, and this covers the installation of solar technology on an individual taxpayer's home. But beyond this, there's also funding made available in IRA that could be used towards solar deployment in the form of, sorry, Mianka, I believe there's one more transition on this slide. Yes, funding made available in IRA that will impact solar deployment. So there are grants such as the Solar for All program, the Rural Energy for America program, as well as energy justice programs through the EPA. And there are also loans available through the DOE Loan Program Office, the Tribal Energy Office, and many others. And so with all of these incentives, you can imagine that it's been a fairly eventful year going forward with all of these tax credits and programs. If we could go to the next slide, please, Mianka. So starting last August, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, and then Treasury first released guidance in November covering the labor and apprenticeship requirements that have to be met for certain solar projects to get the full value of the tax credit, their sufficient scale. Then in February, Treasury released guidance on the low-income bonus allocation process and the 48C process. Starting in April, they released guidance on the energy community bonus. And then in May, they released guidance on the domestic content bonus. Next, please, Mianka. And then later in May, they also released guidance on the low-income bonus allocation process and more guidance on the 48C process as well. Next. Then in June, they released guidance on the direct pay and transferability components, as well as updated guidance on the energy community. And then lastly, most recently in August, they released final guidance on the low-income bonus allocation process for 2023. So taken all together, while further guidance is still needed on several issues, the IRS and Treasury have made significant progress in IRA's first year on giving the industry clarity for the next decade's worth of tax credits. And I do think seeing it all together, it's made a lot of progress in just this first year. But next slide, please, Bianca. There's also, as I mentioned, not just tax credits within IRA, there's also other funding available, and other departments and offices have made significant progress in IRA's first year, including the Department of Agriculture, USDA, soliciting applications for their fiscal year 2023 Rural Energy for America program applications, which saw a significant increase in funding as a result of IRA, and they released further guidance on that in March. And the Environmental Protection Agency launched the Solar for All program in June, and then the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator and the National Clean Investment Fund in July, which my colleague Nicole Steele will talk about a little bit more later. And then within the DOE, the Loan Programs Office announced a conditional commitment to Sunnova's virtual power plant program in April 2023, marking their first such announcement since the passage of IRA. And LPO also published interim rules for loan guarantees for clean energy projects in May. And then also within DOE, the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, I think there's one more transition on this slide, please, Bianca, announced guidance for their home energy rebate program and their contractor training grants in July. And this isn't by any means a completely comprehensive list of everything, because there are so many programs within IRA that could touch on solar deployments and also bill funding and lots of activity over the past year within the solar deployment world. But this just gives you a sense of the scale. And with that, I'll hand it over to Director Jones-Alberta to tell us more about the impacts that we're seeing as a result of all of this activity.
Thanks, Krista. And we will be posting both the slides and the presentation after, so you all can take advantage of all the links we've included. There's so much that's going on here. But IRA, as you heard from Krista, had a number of different incentives that are intended to support U.S. manufacturing growth. That includes the 45X manufacturing production tax credits, the 48C investment credits for new manufacturing facilities, as well as the domestic content adder to the ITC and PTC. All of this taken together is a significant incentive, and we have seen the industry responding immensely to these incentives in terms of interest in building new manufacturing capacity in the U.S. So prior to IRA, we had a foothold of polysilicon capacity, cadmium telluride, solar panels, and silicon solar module assembly here in the U.S., as well as some tracking and racking capacity. Since the passage of IRA, there's been an explosion of interest across the entire supply chain, which is incredibly exciting. This represents, when you add all the different segments separately, over 200 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity, nearly 20,000 jobs, $11 billion in investments, and in total, almost 60 new facilities or expansions. It's incredibly exciting. On the left side here, it shows the different announced capacity expansions by supply chain segment. So you can see there's silicon wafers and cells, the largest share being PV modules, which has more announced capacity than we have current deployment and demand, which is exciting, an opportunity for the U.S. to be more than sufficient in its module manufacturing needs, as well as increases in inverters, key parts for the module assembly, tools, and tracking and racking. These announcements are mostly slated to come online in the next 2 years, and they're spread across the United States, as you see on the right here. The map here shows states in green where manufacturing facilities are planned and the number planned in that state. And we should say that not all of announced manufacturing expansions have yet announced a location, so these numbers are expected to grow over the coming months, and it's just an incredibly exciting time to see this manufacturing footprint grow and reaching 22 states here and Puerto Rico. Most of these facilities, again, are still under construction. They don't yet have production rolling off the line, but within the next year or two, we'll start to see that production. That's on the manufacturing side. We can go to the next slide and see impacts on deployment. BNEF, WoodMac, and others have looked at the expected increase in deployment over the next 5 years as a result of IRA. And Bianca, we've lost the slides here. Overall, they expect that deployment is going to increase by about 30% due to the additional incentives provided by IRA compared to what was expected before that, which is very exciting. Those numbers and those increases are really important if they're going to help us get to our decarbonization goals. But we still have the expected deployment numbers that are not quite high enough to reach the solar deployment we think we need to get to the President's goal of the decarbonized grid by 2035. So even more needed, but a big boost provided by IRA. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Krista to talk about some of the other provisions for IRA and expanding benefits to all communities.
Great. Thanks, Becca. I think I'll see if I can give Patrice just a few seconds to get the slides running again, so I'm not just talking about something people can't see. So yes, next 2 slides from here, if we could please. But just to give a primer on what I'm going to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, commitment to the President's Justice 40 initiative is evident throughout the implementation of IRA. And so we're just going to walk through a couple examples, there we go, together of where you can see these concepts have been worked into the legislation. And the first example that I'll talk about is probably the most explicitly Justice 40 example within IRA, and that's the Advanced Energy Project Credit, or 48C. This will be administered by DOE's Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, and 1.6 billion, i.e. precisely 40% of the $4 billion being allocated in the first round of tax credits is reserved for clean energy manufacturing and recycling projects in eligible coal closure communities which have been adversely impacted by the energy transition. And we can see where those communities are located on the left. That was put together by, I believe, a joint DOE and IRS efforts. And this 40% carve out was written into the legislation of the Inflation Reduction Act. But Treasury's guidance has also further incorporated Justice 40 ideals by requiring applicants to complete workforce and community education plans so that these new facilities must take, community engagement plans, so that these new facilities must take into consideration local pollution, benefit sharing, and job creation. Treasury is also requiring applicants to assess net impact on greenhouse gases via direct, indirect, and life cycle emissions so that the projects with the greatest impact on overburdened communities can be identified. And so, of course, this isn't actually the only example of energy communities within IRA. So if we can go to the next slide, as many of you I'm sure are aware, there's that energy bonus credit that I mentioned earlier. This is targeting several different types of communities which have been adversely impacted by the energy transition. The energy community bonus credit will spur investment in communities that have been overburdened by pollution or were dependent on the fossil fuel industry. And again, DOE and IRS have worked together to put together a map tool for developers to use to identify relevant locations. And while one category remains to be finalized, Treasury has provided FAQs and also more detailed guidance for developers to determine whether a project is in a coal closure community or adjacent to one, whether it's in a fossil fuel community with high unemployment based on fossil fuel employment rates. And while unfortunately it can't be shown in the map since it's a slightly more complicated category, the FAQs and guidance also cover how a developer or project owner can know whether or not they are located in an eligible brownfield. But energy communities are not the only communities eligible for bonus tax credit through IRA. So if you can go to the next slide. There is also the low-income community bonus to the investment tax credit, otherwise known as 48E. And this bonus will be administered by DOE's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. This program will increase adoption of and access to renewable energy in low-income communities while providing social and economic benefits. Final rules on how the 1.8 gigawatts per year of 48E tax credits will be allocated in 2023 were released on August 10th, describing how that capacity will be divided up between the 4 different categories, as you can see in the graph at the center. Those 4 categories are low-income communities, as defined by the New Markets tax credits, Indian lands, or projects on Indian land, and those 2 categories can receive up to a 10% tax credit, or qualified low-income residential building projects and qualified low-income economic benefits projects, which can include community solar projects, are eligible for a 20% tax credit, up to sort of the amounts indicate the number of projects indicated by these capacities. And Treasury rules further embraced Justice 40 ideals by establishing a 20% bill credit discount requirement for low-income economic benefit projects. Basically, what that means is there's a minimum threshold of benefits that a project must provide in order to be able to apply for this tax credit. And Treasury also has assigned priority to projects based on ownership and location criteria, prioritizing investment in communities that have historically been marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. And as one last example, we can go to the next slide of how IRA is working to expand access through these tax credits, or expand access to the benefits of solar energy through these tax credits. There's also the new direct pay mechanism. As a result of the direct or elective pay option, groups such as school districts, nonprofits, Indian tribal governments, rural electric cooperatives, and many others who were previously ineligible for the investment tax credit and production tax credit can now take full advantage of these tax credits. As shown in the little diagram on the right, even for those groups, if their tax burden is less than the full value of the credit, so long as they fill out their tax forms and pre-register and meet all the requirements of their system, they should receive the full value of the tax credit back from the Treasury. And while more guidance is yet to come, Treasury's thorough FAQs and pre-registration process to be launched later this year are intended to help organizations which may never have filed federal taxes previously successfully navigate the process of obtaining these tax credits to deploy solar energy in schools, on tribal land, throughout underserved communities, and ideally everywhere else it is needed. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Nicole Steele, who will talk about some other nationwide programs aimed at increasing access to the benefits of solar energy.
Thanks, Krista. Really appreciate the opportunity to sort of speak about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the potential that solar has as part of this new program over at the EPA. As some of you on the phone may know, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is the largest single non-tax funded program developed through IRA. And so it is was created with $27 billion with the intention of doing three things. And really that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions, ensuring that low income and disadvantaged communities have access to clean energy deployment and the benefits that clean energy deployment can provide, as well as significantly leveraging enough private sector capital or significantly leveraging private sector capital with the seed money that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund does provide. And so, you know, we talk about $27 billion and it seems like an incredible amount of money, but really it's like a little bit of a lot of money. So really a major portion is we're gonna have to leverage private sector capital to really transform markets as we need to do. So to give you a little bit more background on you know, the sort of timeline and plans for GGRF, as colloquially known, in statute, the funding was sort of put in two buckets. One was a $20 billion bucket to really create those sort of financing mechanisms that are necessary, and then a $7 billion bucket to ensure that zero emission technologies are being deployed in low income and disadvantaged communities, and really those households and communities are seeing the true benefits that clean energy technologies can provide. And so about 8 weeks ago, the team over at EPA released 3 competitively funded grant competitions, 2 of which apply to the $20 billion bucket. So these 2 are the financing elements of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. The first one being the National Clean Investment Fund. And EPA intends on awarding somewhere between 2 and 3 awards, with nearly $14 billion going to those 2 or 3 awards. the eligible entity that can apply for that funding are eligible nonprofits. And really there's a more specific definitions to that eligible nonprofit, and being that that nonprofit must be a lending nonprofit. So its functionality needs to be that it lends out money in a recyclable way. And so you may be thinking there's not that many nonprofits out there that do that. That is true. And so we really do anticipate that there will be new organizations and new functions of nonprofit organizations that will be created as a result of this program. And what the National Clean Investment Fund is really meant to do is to provide that direct lending capital to the lending institutions and then ultimately the borrower to ensure that they have access to clean energy deployment funds. And so, this could be playing a role in all different types of lending products to ensure that, we're either driving down interest rates or providing loan guarantees or bridge loans or just, straight low interest loans, whatever it might be that the market needs in order to deploy different types of priority projects identified in the NCIF. And those priority projects really do range from everything from like the building sector to the transportation sector, and then the distributed generation and storage sector as well. And so really, again, direct lending. Solar is obviously part of the NCIF, and we anticipate there being all different types of products that really support the deployment of solar. I will also say that a minimum of 40% to be in alignment with Justice 40 of all of these funds must go into low income and disadvantaged communities. So then the next funding competition that under the lending bucket is the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. And EPA plans on making somewhere between 2 and 7 awards to those same types of eligible nonprofits, where in the funding bucket is $6 billion. And so again, up to 7 awards. And really what the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator is meant to do is to ensure that there's different networks of lending institutions. So think like green banks, CDFIs, credit unions, commercial banks, and other lenders. They all function a little differently than one another and need different types of support. And obviously there's nuances in those individual buckets. But the idea is that these individual awardees will really help ensure that their lending network has access to understanding what financial products are needed in the market, any type of technical assistance they might need to create those products, to build organizational capacity, to be trained in how to administer these types of lending products, and then ultimately how to build that sort of project pipeline. And so this is a really important thing. These are the lending institutions on the ground, who understand their community and understand their community's needs. And so how are they going out building that project pipeline so that folks can start to receive direct lending capital, both through the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator and then ultimately through the National Clean Investment Fund. And again, we see solar playing a huge role in accessing these types of funds. Really, some examples could be in sort of the multifamily affordable housing space, and really sort of some of those like low income or middle income financing products that I think there's still gaps in the market. And then last but not least, and very excited about sort of the third bucket, which is called Solar for All. And this is the bucket that I was mentioning earlier around how do we ensure that low income and disadvantaged communities really have access to the clean energy transition, but really truly see the benefits of clean energy. And so this is a $7 billion program. EPA anticipates making up to 60 awards as part of the Solar for All program. And then the eligible entity bucket is actually much bigger. And so it's directed at states, territories, tribal and municipal governments, as well as those same nonprofits. So the eligible nonprofits that do lending capital. And Solar for All is really designed to be 100% low income and disadvantaged communities focused. And it is deploying rooftop solar, community solar, and storage, as well as integrating enabling upgrades as necessary, and other wraparound services like energy efficiency, consumer education and outreach, as well as local workforce development. All of these competitions are out on the street right now, so I'm not going to really be able to answer that many questions if any come in the chat. But there are FAQ pages that are available on the EPA website per those funding competitions. The due dates for these funding competitions are also on the website. There are in the sort of October timeframe. But the other thing that I really wanted to mention is that announcements are anticipated to be made for awardees in the March 2024 timeframe. And as many of you may already know, per statute, all of this funding needs to be obligated by September 2024. So the GGRF team over at EPA is feverishly working on making sure that they have a process for review and so that they're able to make announcements of these awards in March 2024. So an incredible opportunity to really sort of like seed markets and do true market transformation, really with a huge lens of distributed solar and storage and community solar deployment. So with that, I'm going to actually transition to my last slide. Perfect. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are familiar with the Solar for All competition language or familiar with the National Community Solar Partnership and the work here in the SETO office, you might be very familiar with what we're calling the meaningful benefits of community solar, or the meaningful benefits of solar more broadly. And wanted to take a little bit of time to go through this because this is something that, you know, we're talking about across the whole of government, and really sort of thinking about how do we look at the Justice 40 priorities and look at all of the tax credits that are available, look at all the funding that is available, and how do we ensure, you know, that as we are spending dollars in low-income and disadvantaged communities, that folks are truly seeing the benefits of clean energy deployment. And so this is really what we sort of how we look at, you know, truly meaningful deployment and ensuring that it goes well beyond access. Because I know when a lot of these conversations initially started around low income and disadvantaged community or disadvantaged communities deployment, it was a lot about just access. And what we also care about is many more things. So obviously we start with access, and access can look like a lot of different things. Like, do folks have a choice? Do they want to can they put solar on their roof? Can they get a subscription to community solar? Do low-income households have access to financing products that allow them to see, to take advantage of either one of those and see the benefits of either rooftop or community solar? And so access, it's really starts with access. But then the other thing is that we also want to make sure that folks are truly seeing savings, and that lower income households pay a much larger portion of their take-home pay to utility bills. And so really utilizing the deployment of distributed clean energy to drive down that energy burden and ensure that the solar that they have access to is actually driving down their energy bill costs. And so you will see in 48 little e tax credit for community solar, which is the category 4, you know, sort of being able to access the financial subsidy, truly financial benefits of community solar, that folks will need to see a minimum savings of 20%. You will see in the Solar for All program that households will need to see a minimum savings of 20%. And so we're really not only trying to sort of democratize the deployment of different types of solar, but ensure that we're also driving down energy burden at the same time. And then also really making sure that resilience and grid benefits are being integrated into these conversations. Do folks also have access to energy storage? Do they have a place to go in the case of an emergency? You know, do they have access to the types of funding and tax credits necessary to couple storage with solar? and you know, and a whole bunch of different sort of varieties of what that could look like, whether it's at their own individual house or in their community, and there's a resilience hub nearby that they can go. And so really making sure that that's a lens that we're thinking about as we're deploying distributed energy. But then there's also this sort of like wealth building piece, and like, how do we make sure that we're thinking about business models that truly supports community ownership and community wealth building? And do folks really have a say in what distributed energy deployment looks like? And so, you know, maybe they have an ownership stake in an LLC, maybe they are involved in actual like sort of deployment decisions of like where facilities are built and what sort of impact they have on their community. But like, how do folks take advantage of, you know, sort of any wealth building opportunities that they might be able to take advantage of as we're thinking about deployment around clean energy and like distributed clean energy specifically? And then last but not least, the fifth meaningful benefit really is sort of this workforce and entrepreneurship space. And are we ensuring that when we are building solar, are folks receiving not only a prevailing wage, but really, you know, a living wage that includes benefits and safety and mentorship and standardization and everything that folks need to feel safe in a good paying career and feel fully supported in that process? And that includes opportunities for training and opportunities to join a union and really, you know, make sure that they're fully supported throughout their career. And then last but not least, really supporting local women and minority owned businesses to have an opportunity to build capacity and join this clean energy transition. And so focusing a lot of our sort of efforts in making sure that those either existing or new organizations have an opportunity to be part of this clean energy transition. So with that, I am going to turn it back to Becca. So thanks so much. And Becca, it's all yours.
Thanks, Nicole. So hopefully you've taken from this even more evidence of how transformative IRA is being today on the clean energy landscape, but specifically solar. As Nicole just talked about some, and Krista before, tax credits are flowing for the first time to communities that have been marginalized, overburdened by pollution, and underserved by infrastructure. We're seeing deployment that's going to be tens of gigawatts higher for solar and much larger than that for clean energy as a whole over the next 5 years due to the deployment incentives. And in building a secure supply chain that's creating manufacturing jobs here at home, IRA is motivating a tremendous growth in solar manufacturing to take us from a time where we've been reliant on imports to install the solar panels here in this country to a time when we can make most of the solar we're installing in this country here at home. It's a truly nationwide approach that's helping ensure all Americans can receive meaningful benefits from solar energy. It is truly historic legislation, and we're really excited about all that's been accomplished in the past year and all that's going to be coming over the next decade. So while so much has happened over the past year, we can go to the next slide, there's still a lot of important things to come. When it comes to the allocated tax credits, one of which is 48C, the Advanced Energy Project credits, that has concept papers under review for the first round, and so that's moving forward. The Low-Income Communities Bonus Program applicant guide and user portal are coming soon for that allocated credits. And there's more guidance and information coming on many other important features here, including direct pay and transferability, final domestic content bonus rules, more information on the manufacturing production tax credit, and identifying energy communities based on fossil fuel tax revenue. Go to the next slide here. So we want to take just a couple minutes to talk about how SETO is working to maximize the impacts of IRA. And we're doing this in a number of ways. When it comes to helping accelerate deployment and allowing these tax credits to motivate as much solar and clean energy deployment as possible. We have a number of programs that are really focusing on addressing some of the barriers that don't enable us to install as much solar as we could. These are permitting, interconnection, siting. And so we have a number of tools. We've developed partnership programs all working on these important problems. I know many of you on this call are involved in some of that really important work. We also have our systems integration portfolio, which is improving solar and wind and battery storage's abilities to support the reliability, the resilience, and the security of this grid as we transform the grid from one that is focused on large-scale inertia-based power generators to a grid that has high levels of distributed generation, that has variable generation, and that is power electronics-based and renewable. When it comes to enabling equitable access to meaningful benefits from solar, our flagship program is the National Community Solar Partnership, working in a number of ways to accelerate community solar deployment and ensure that deployment is growing, helping provide as many meaningful benefits as possible to communities. We've also been working on workforce training partnerships to enable equitable access to good jobs that come from this transition. And on the manufacturing and innovation side, we continue to, as we have been for so many years, continue to support R&D and demonstration of new technologies and to drive that towards lower and lower costs, as well as providing support both financial and through contacts and resources to entrepreneurs and businesses that want to commercialize these new technologies and get them to market. And so more specifically, I want to talk about some of our funding opportunities that are open right now or will be open soon. The first here is our materials, operation and recycling of photovoltaics, BOA. This is a $20 million funding opportunity that's holistically focused on the life cycle of a PV system, working to increase reuse and recycling, improve performance, and reduce other life cycle costs for these solar energy systems by looking at them holistically. Concept papers for those are due in just over a week on September 16th. Next here is funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law for pilot scale manufacturing of technologies in the silicon supply chain, as well as incubator funding for new dual use technologies such as building integrated PV or agricultural PV dual use technologies. This is $45 million of funding with concept papers due on September 27th. And third here is our renewable energy siting through technical engagement and planning, which we call RSTEP. We anticipate will open next week and have about approximately $10 million in funding and technical assistance for state-based programs that will improve renewable energy planning and siting processes. In addition to those funding opportunities, on the next slide, we have some open prize competitions. And our prizes are traditionally or typically lower barrier to entry than our other funding opportunities, and they're great. So they're great ways for folks to get involved in working with our office. We have our American-made Solar Prize, round 7, the 7th round of this prize competition, which has submissions due September 27th. And this is for entrepreneurs or small businesses who have a new idea for an innovative solar product. Our Solar District Cup is open for colleges and universities to enroll until the end of this month. And this is a competition that is giving students experience modeling distributed energy systems for campuses or districts. A great way to get them really understanding more about some of the key grid and integration challenges that we need to face as we grow our clean energy supply. Third, coming out of our National Community Solar Partnership, is our Community Power Accelerator Prize, round 2 of the prize. Applications are due October 4th for new and existing developers who are going to be developing community solar projects and looking to maximize the meaningful benefits that they develop as part of those projects. Last two prize competitions here are open for later rounds for folks who have already entered. So we'll move on here and just share that we have a lot of resources I mentioned before. We'll be posting these slides to our website. So there's lots of embedded links to give you more information, but specifically on all of the tax credits, we have links here for information from the Internal Revenue Service, as well as cleanenergy.gov links from the White House and resources we've developed at SETO as well. With that, I think we'll move into periods where we can take some questions. I know that there's an active Q&A going on already and a lot of questions getting responded to in the chat, but if we have others, we can take those now. Paul, are there any other questions for us to take live here?
Becca, yeah, I've been answering most of them, but there are a couple that I think Nicole or Krista might be able to answer. So let's give them a moment to have a look through the list and see if there's anything they could add to. I think I've answered the ones I can.
It does seem like there was a question on the application of IRA for solar thermal for process heating and cooling. And so the applicable tax credit for that would be 48C. Unfortunately, the first round of funding applications for that has closed, but that tax credit should cover the cost of re-equipping an industrial or manufacturing facility with equipment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20%. So retrofitting a system to use solar thermal for process heating and cooling could be one example of that application in the manufacturing space. But as I said, unfortunately, first round of that is closed, but there should be subsequent rounds of 48C. And then I think there's also an ongoing discussion about the low income process and how there is still no portal for registering projects, which is required to be done before projects are placed in service. I do want to clarify there that the low income bonus isn't guaranteed. It's not simply a registration process. There's a cap, a capacity cap per year. So a project cannot be placed in service prior to receiving an allocation. So things there can get a little bit tricky if a project is actually imminently going to be placed in service, but I see that Nicole has muted herself or turned on her video, and so maybe she might also want to speak to this as well.
Oh, I was going to address this question about the webinar that's scheduled for Monday. I actually just talked to the EPA folks right before this call, and I guess they've had some technical difficulties in getting the link out, but it is imminent. So if you are registered, you should receive a link, and if you're on the GGRF just listserv, you will get a reminder about the webinar that's on Monday, and really what the webinar do is posted, I believe, a week ago at this point in time that provided a little bit more guidance around total funding amount requests, and also extended the timeline for the Solar for All competition specifically. So again, the webinar on Monday is specific to the Solar for All program, and you should be getting that information out very, very soon.
There's also a question in the chat about how we might plan to educate low-income customers about the IRA tax credit programs. We are working on some resources internally that might be specific to different audiences, but at the moment what we have available are those resources that were linked at the end, discussing for homeowners what the relevant tax credits for them may or may not be, and sort of running through examples and what those look like. So I recommend anyone to look at those resources. And then there also seems to be a question in chat about IRA impacts on battery storage manufacturing. There have been a lot, I can say anecdotally, but we don't track that in-house within SETO. But I'll see if I can find a link for something that has been put out by EERE, sort of summarizing what those announcements look like.
All right, I think with that, we will go ahead.
Patrice, we lost your audio, so I'll jump in here. But with that, we would like to thank all of you for joining us today to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. The recording of this presentation and the slides will be at energy.gov/SETO-events. You can find other good links here in front of you, including a link to our newsletter, so you won't miss out on future things that come forward. So we'll leave this up for a few moments. You can catch those links, and thank you again for joining us.